Hi, this is Gang Lee, Product Leader of ISO 29481 Part 3 Information Delivery Manual, Data Schema and Classification, and also Professor at Yonsei University in Korea. It is my pleasure to give you an overview of ISO 29481 Part 3. For about 15 minutes, I'm going to explain what ISO 29481 Part 3 is about, a high-level overview of ISO 29481 Part 3 IDM schema, the relationships between IDM and other standards, and the current status. So what is ISO 29481 Part 3 and how is it different from ISO 29481 Part 1? ISO 29481 Part 3 is an interpretation of ISO 29481 Part 1, the IDM standard, into data schema to make IDM specifications machine readable. Nowadays, ISO started using the expression SMART. SMART stands for Standards Machine Applicable, Readable, and Transferable. Since the proposed schema is fully based on ISO 29481 Part 1, it might be worth spending some time on making sure that everyone is on the same page regarding what IDM is before we discuss ISO 29481 Part 3 further. Quite a few documents roughly explain IDM as a process, but that is not an accurate description of IDM. The essence of IDM is the information requirement specification. I know where the misconception came from. Building Smart International used this diagram for many years to promote the concept of IDM, IFC, and IFD. In a broad sense, it might not be incorrect to say that IDM is a process, but technically it is incorrect. We should say IDM includes a process. Here's the definition of IDM from ISO 29481 Part 1. ISO 29481 Part 1 defines IDM as detailed specifications of the information required at a certain point of a project. Of course, business process is also an essential part of IDM standard. So ISO 29481 Part 1 specifies that two main components of IDM is exchange requirements, ER, and process maps, PM. ER is a set of information requirements defined in a natural language or layperson's terms. They can be mapped to formally defined data definitions such as IFC. Some ER documents have tabular form like this, and some ER documents have a sentential structure. These are examples of PM documents. It includes process maps, but also includes aims and scope, and also the background information. In some regions and communities, IDM is also referred to as IDS, Information Delivery Specification. ISO 29481 Part 1 defines that IDM is the same thing as IDS. So what are the challenges of not having a machine readable IDM specifications? Currently, IDM specifications are defined in a Word or PDF format, so they are not smart, not machine transferable or shareable. So it is not easy to share or repurpose IDM specifications. For example, if you have a IDM or information requirements defined for a hospital project, if you have, probably you spent a year to generate the information requirements or IDM specification. But if you have the second hospital project, then you can bring in the IDM document or specification and slightly modify it to generate an IDM document for the second hospital project. it's not just the editing process in a word, but it's more data generation process. So if you have a machine readable IDM, then you can make this process, the generation of IDM specification process, much faster and easier. And to do so, we need to have connections between IDM component specifications. By IDM component specifications, I mean there gotta be tight connection between ER documents and PM documents. Because we don't have a machine readable IDM, there is not direct connections between, for example, an element in a process map, such as a data object and ER. You need to fix, if you want to generate something new from an existing IDM, you need to go find each one of these and these related things, and then you need to fix them one by one manually. And of course, there is no direct or smart connection between IDM and other related standards. Also, because of this, although there are rapidly increasing demands of IDM specifications by, for example, ISO 19650 and others, but the development process is very slow. So through ISO 29481 Part 3, we'd like to make IDM specifications smart, standards machine readable, applicable, and transferable. By doing so, we'd like to facilitate the exchange and development of IDM specifications, to provide tight links between IDM and other related standards, and to automate real-time MVD generation from IDM specifications. There have been some efforts to make IDM smart, including XBPM, a method and tool developed by my research team about 10 years ago based on the first IDM standard and GTP-PM. And another effort is BeamQ by AEC3. I'm going to show you short demos. This is a demo of XBPM. If you have IDM defined in XML format, then you can automatically and dynamically generate a report like this. And if you have an IDM and the relationship between IDM and MVD setup, then you can automatically generate an MVD like this. And if anything changes in the definition of IDM, then you can automatically generate an updated MVD from the IDM specification. Similarly, AEC3 recently developed something called BeamQ, which has the use case specification module and information specification module and report generation function like this, and it can be also linked to an IFC schema or MVD schema to automatically generate MVD from IDM definition. However, these are all done in a proprietary way, so these are not machine readable or applicable, shareable, or transferable. So how was it developed? After the proof of concept demonstration in 2012 at a Building Smart International meeting, the project was kind of semi-initiated, but was officially approved in April 2019. A total of 46 IDM experts from all over the world participated in the development. We analyzed a total of 188 IDM specification sets and analyzed the contents one by one to support as many cases as we can. So let me briefly explain what the IDM schema looks like at a high level. We use 5 acronyms in the documents: IDM, UC, PM, ER, IM, and TM. These are not entirely new. IDM, UC are newly added, but PM, ER, IM, TM have been used in the Part 1 standard. To distinguish IDM concept from its instance, we use an expression IDM specification, IDM document, or IDS specification, or IDM document. Similarly, we use ER specification, ER document, or PM specification, PM document to denote an instance of ER or PM concept. In case of use, use is, for example, beam use is a concept, is instance is use case with a specific scope and aim, but it's also a concept. So we can have an instance of use case, which is a use case specification or use case document. In Part 1, there was no concept of use case, but each IDM, PM, and ER document commonly had header information, which was a set of metadata items like aims and scope and so on. In the IDM schema, the metadata set, including the aims and scope and others, are defined as a use case. We thought hard about what IDM was from a data schema point of view. We learned that IDM could be viewed as a wrapper of its subcomponents. We can also view IDM as a folder, use case as a label, and PMs and ER as the contents of an IDM. This shows how the relationships are represented in terms of a data schema. The IDM schema also includes a capability to link an IDM specification to an external standard schema, including IFC, BSDD, and so on. Here's the current version of the entire schema. The full IDM schema is available in 2 versions, in class diagram and XML schema, XSD. The full schema is only available to the ISO working group 8 members. So what are the relationships between ISO 29481 and other standards? This issue is actually beyond the scope of ISO 29481 Part 3. It has to do with Part 1. So the IDM standard specified the specification method for information requirements and the context. ISO 19650 defines the information management method at each stage of a project using BIM. So this is a diagram from CEN, European Standard Group, and it clearly shows the relationship between ISO 19650 and ISO 29481 IDM, and the RIR, OIR, AIR, PIR are the ones, the information requirements, which should be submitted during a project, and IDM, the standard, defines how the IDM should be, information requirements should be defined. There is a low-in level of information needs standards by CEN. There can be different versions of IDM documents depending on low-in standards. ISO 12006 Part 3 defines a language-independent data structure for data dictionaries. As explained earlier, ISO 29481 Part 3 includes a structure to connect IDM and external schemas, including this data dictionary schema. Using the same data structure, ISO 29481 Part 3 can connect IDM and external schemas, including IFC, CTGML, MVD, and others. So what is the current status? This proposal for the IDM schema was accepted as a new work item this August, and the working group had the first meeting on October 15th. We are now working on the 24-month track to publish this ISO 29481 Part 3 standard by July 1st, 2022. I hope that this presentation was helpful to understand what ISO 29481 Part 3 is about. If you have any question or comments, please email me at lee@yonsei.ac.kr.